At 11:47, my wife threw my life onto the porch in 2 garbage bags. The rain in Dallas was steady, not angry, just cold enough to make every shirt and receipt feel heavier than it was. Melissa stood inside our doorway, barefoot on the hardwood I had refinished last spring, holding the deadbolt like a judge holding a gavel. Behind her, Blake Anderson's black Range Rover idled at the curb, clean and expensive, windshield glowing beneath the streetlight. He did not step out. Men like that preferred witnesses, not consequences. Melissa looked past me and said calmly, "Leave Daniel before you embarrass yourself." My name is Daniel Carter, 41 years old, white American man, heating and air conditioning repairman by trade, husband by promise and fool by patience. That night, I learned how quickly a house can stop being home. 1 minute, you are the man who fixes the furnace, pays the electric bill, and changes the smoke detector batteries before they chirp. The next, you're standing in the rain while your wife explains that love needs lifestyle, not loyalty. She said she had married potential, not a man still crawling from paycheck to paycheck. I wanted to answer, but my throat closed around every year I had carried us. 12-hour service calls in August heat. Weekend emergency jobs when other men were at baseball games. The used Silverado I kept running because her car payment mattered more. The birthday dinner I skipped for myself, so she could wear a dress that made her smile. All of it stood there with me, soaked and silent. Melissa did not cry. She looked relieved, which hurt worse. She slid my duffel across the threshold with her foot and said, "I need a future that does not smell like work boots." The words landed clean. No shouting, no drama, just a door closing inside my chest. I picked up the bags because that is what men like me do when they are humiliated. We collect what is ours without making the neighbors look. Blake finally rolled down his window. Just enough for me to see his watch, his perfect teeth, the confidence of a man borrowing a story he had not paid for. Melissa saw me notice him and lifted her chin. "I'm not apologizing for wanting better," she said. I nodded once, because if I spoke then, something inside me might have begged, and I refused to let Blake hear that. I walked to the truck with water running down my neck, tossed the bags behind the seat, and drove until the house disappeared in the mirror. Dallas blurred through the windshield, red taillights, and gas station signs smearing like wet paint. My debit card declined at the first motel, then the second. Melissa had frozen the joint account. Of course she had. I sat under the humming lobby light with a clerk pretending not to pity me, and opened my wallet like a man checking his last breath. There was $28, my driver license, a hardware store receipt, and my mother's old card. Evelyn Carter had kept it in a chipped ceramic bowl by her kitchen sink for years, silver blue plastic worn soft at the corners. After she died, I slipped it behind my license because it still smelled faintly like lavender soap and the little house she left empty on the south side of town. I never thought it worked. I never tried. It was not money to me. It was a piece of her, a quiet weight in my pocket when life felt mean. I handed it to the clerk. He swiped it once, then frowned. The terminal beeped twice and froze. He tried again. The screen flashed red, then blue, then went black except for one line. "Please wait. Account verification required." The clerk looked at me differently now, not with pity, but caution. "Sir," he said, "did you call your bank before using this card?" I almost laughed. My bank? I was a wet repairman with garbage bags in my truck and nowhere to sleep. Then my phone rang from a number I did not know. The voice was tight, professional. "Mr. Carter, please do not leave that location," the voice said. "This is Richard Whitman from First Lone Star Bank." I looked at the motel clerk, who had suddenly stopped pretending to be busy. Rain knocked against the glass doors behind me, and the lobby smelled like bleach, cheap coffee, and wet carpet. I had never heard a banker sound afraid before. Bankers sounded bored, polished, irritated maybe, but not afraid. Yet this man spoke like my mother's old card had just opened a basement door nobody wanted disturbed. I told him I was at the Candlewood Motor Lodge off Interstate 35, and he exhaled like he had found a missing child. "Stay there," he said. "Our security team is contacting the branch manager now." Security team. Branch manager. Those words did not belong to me. They belonged to men in tailored suits, women with private offices, people who did not count quarters for vending machine dinners. I asked if the card had been stolen or if something was wrong with my mother's account, and the line went quiet just long enough for my stomach to drop. Then Richard said, "Your mother was Evelyn Carter, correct?" I had not heard her full name from a stranger since the funeral. "Yes," I said, and the lobby seemed to narrow around that one word. He asked me to confirm my birth date, the last 4 digits of my social security number, and the address of the little white house on Marigold Lane where Mom had kept tomato plants, church bulletins, and every birthday card I ever made her. I answered each question while the clerk watched me with the frozen smile people where when a normal night starts turning into someone else's emergency. When Richard finished, his voice softened. "Mr. Carter, I need you to listen carefully. The card you attempted to use is not a standard debit card. It is connected to an access protocol on a dormant private trust." I blinked at the word trust like it was written in a language I had seen but never spoken. My mother used coupons. My mother drove a 1998 Buick until the passenger window stopped rolling down. My mother made soup in the same dinner pot for 30 years and told me restaurants charge people for laziness. Trust was not a word that lived in her kitchen. Richard continued, speaking slowly now, like he feared too much truth at once might send me walking back into the rain. That card triggered a mandatory identity review. It should not have been active unless the designated heir used it with matching personal identifiers. Designated heir. I sat down in a vinyl chair near a plastic plant and pressed my free hand against my knee to keep it still. Outside, my Silverado sat under the yellow motel light with 2 garbage bags in the back, looking exactly like the life Melissa believed I deserved. Richard asked if I could come to the main branch downtown. I said it was after midnight. He said they were opening it for me. That was when the motel clerk finally spoke. "Sir, your room is still declined." I almost told him it did not matter, but my voice had gone somewhere deep and quiet. Richard heard enough to understand. "Do not worry about the room," he said. "A car is being sent. Please bring identification and the card." "A car? For me?" I ended the call and stood there with rainwater drying on my sleeves and Melissa's words still fresh in my ears. "I need a future that does not smell like work boots." 20 minutes later, a black sedan pulled under the motel awning. The driver stepped out, knew my name, and held the door open like I was someone expected. Dallas at night passed in streaks of red and gold across the window. I watched gas stations, empty parking lots, and wet overpasses slide by, feeling less like a man being rescued and more like a man being delivered to a truth his mother had hidden inside plastic, patience, and silence. The sedan turned off Commerce Street and glided toward the downtown branch of First Lone Star Bank, a limestone building I had passed 100 times without ever imagining my name belonged inside after midnight. The lobby lights were on, bright and unnatural, spilling across polished floors and brass rails like someone had staged a meeting with a ghost. A security guard opened the glass doors before I touched them. Richard Whitman waited near the elevators, silver hair combed back, navy suit buttoned wrong from haste. He shook my hand with both of his and looked at the worn card like it might start speaking. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming," he said, though coming made it sound voluntary. I followed him past empty teller windows and dark offices into a private room with glass walls, bottled water, and a table too clean for a man carrying rain and garbage bags in his truck. He placed my mother's card on a white cloth between us and did not sit down immediately. That small hesitation told me more than any number could. My mother had been gone 3 years, but suddenly the room felt full of her. Lavender soap, cheap coffee, the sound of her Buick coughing awake on winter mornings. Evelyn Carter never looked like a woman who owned secrets. She wore department store sneakers until the soles leaned sideways. She rinsed freezer bags and reused foil if it still had shine. When I offered to buy her a new microwave, she said the old one still knew its job. Yet Richard stood over that card with the posture of a man handling inheritance, not plastic. He finally sat and opened a leather folder. "Daniel," he said, "may I call you Daniel?" I nodded because Mr. Carter felt like someone wealthier. "This access card was issued to your mother under a restricted family trust structure in 2001. It was never intended for regular purchases. It was designed to verify identity if the primary heir appeared without prior notice. I stared at him while the words stacked themselves into something impossible. Primary heir. Restricted trust. My mother owned 2 winter coats and argued with the electric company over $9. Richard slid a document across the table. At the top was her signature, small and careful, the way she wrote labels on jars of peach preserves. Evelyn Margaret Carter. My throat tightened around her middle name. He said there would be an attorney present within the hour, Patricia Monroe, and until then, he could only explain the mechanism. The card had triggered dormant status review, biometric verification through government identification, and heir succession release. It sounded like machinery starting behind a wall. I asked the only question that mattered. How much money are we talking about? Richard looked at the folder, then at me, and for the first time that night, I saw pity leave his face. This is not simply an account, he said. It is a trust portfolio, land holdings, mineral interests, and private equity positions originally connected to your mother's family. The preliminary value is substantial. My mouth went dry. Substantial was a word rich people used when numbers were too impolite to say quickly. I thought of Melissa shoving my duffel over the threshold, Blake watching from that Range Rover, my debit card declined under motel lights. The room did not spin. It sharpened. Every insult from that porch came back wearing a different face. Richard slid a bottle of water toward me and said my mother left instructions that no full disclosure be given until Patricia arrived. I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because that sounded exactly like Evelyn. Even from the grave, she refused to let men in suits rush her son into confusion. I picked up the card and felt the worn corner press into my palm was warm now. Or maybe I was. Richard spoke again, but I barely heard him. All I could hear was my mother's old saying. When the world throws you out, do not beg to get back in. Use the right door. That night, the door finally opened for me. Patricia Monroe arrived at 1:20 in the morning, carrying a leather briefcase and the kind of calm-faced people where when they already know where the bodies are buried on paper. She was in her early 60s, white hair cut neat at her jaw, pearl earrings, navy coat, no wasted motion. She did not ask why I looked like a man who had been left in the rain and delivered to a bank by strangers. She simply sat across from me, opened the briefcase, and placed a sealed envelope on the table. My name was written on it in my mother's hand. Not Daniel, not Danny, but son, the way she wrote on Christmas cards when money was thin and love had to do the heavy lifting. Patricia said Evelyn wanted me to read the letter before numbers, properties, or signatures. That was my mother. Put the person before the paperwork. I broke the seal with a thumb that had tightened refrigerant valves, replaced blower motors, and held funeral flowers beside her grave. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, or maybe memory was cruel enough to invent that. Her first line stopped me. If you are reading this, the world has finally shown you who would stay after your pockets looked empty. I had to set it down. Richard looked away. Patricia folded her hands. My mother had always been poor in public, but never small. She raised me in that little house on Marigold Lane, where the kitchen floor dipped near the stove and the back porch creaked like it was complaining about another Texas summer. She clipped coupons, bought store-brand cereal, and stretched chicken soup across 3 dinners without making it feel like poverty. On Sundays, she wore the same blue dress to church, pressed so sharp it looked new every time. When I was 12, I asked why she never bought herself nice things. She smiled and said, "Nice is not expensive. Baby, nice is clean, honest, and paid for." I used to think there was pride making peace with less. Sitting in that glass room, I realized it was discipline hiding abundance. Patricia explained between pages. Evelyn had been born into a family that once owned drilling leases and pasture land outside Midland. When her brothers turned greedy and lawsuits started swallowing holidays, she walked away from the family name, but not from the holdings legally placed in her share. She let attorneys manage everything, refused distributions beyond living expenses, and built a wall around the trust so no husband, friend, church gossip, or ambitious daughter-in-law could smell money on her son before he knew what kind of woman he had married. Melissa. Her name moved through me like cold water under a door. I remembered Mom watching her at Thanksgiving 3 years into our marriage. Melissa complaining softly that our rental did not have granite counters, that my truck made the driveway look poor, that Dallas had people who knew how to live. Mom had stirred gravy without looking up and said, "Some folks want a window more than they want a home." I thought she was being old-fashioned. Maybe she was taking notes. The letter said she had watched me give too much and ask too little. She said love should make a man generous, not invisible. She said the card was never about wealth. It was a test of timing. If I used it during comfort, the bank would reject me. If I used it after being cast out, with no access to shared funds, the trust would open because I had finally reached the door she designed for my worst night. I read that sentence twice. My mother had not rescued me from hardship. She had prepared a floor beneath it. Patricia slid another document forward, a postnuptial agreement Melissa had insisted on 18 months earlier to protect herself from my debts. I remembered signing it after another argument about money, feeling ashamed, grateful she still stayed. Patricia tapped one clause. Separate inheritance, separate trust, separate family holdings. Melissa had demanded protection from the poor man and accidentally signed away the rich one. The room went silent. Patricia's sentence did not make me feel rich. It made me feel exposed. For years, Melissa had treated my work boots like evidence against me. And now a single clause showed that the same shame she wanted to escape had locked her outside the door my mother built. Patricia did not smile. Good attorneys never waste truth by decorating it. She turned the agreement toward me and traced the line with one red nail. Separate property remains separate regardless of marital status, she said. Inheritance, trust assets, mineral interests, private holdings, all excluded. Melissa asked for this language herself. I remembered that night with painful clarity. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where she later threw my life away. She wore reading glasses she never needed and slid the pages across to me like homework. She said she was tired of carrying the risk of my debts, tired of being tied to a man whose business could collapse if one summer heat wave went wrong. I signed because I loved her, because shame is a quiet pen, because I thought surrendering paper would prove I was safe to stay married to. Patricia slid another page forward. Your mother's trust anticipated that possibility, she said. It required no challenge, no court fight, no public argument. Everything Melissa tried to separate had already been separated better than she understood. The bank clock read 1:47. Somewhere across Dallas, Melissa was probably asleep in the house I had been pushed out of, maybe comforted by Blake and the clean fantasy that she had traded up. I wondered if she had taken my side of the closet yet. I wondered if she had already told herself I would call begging by morning. The only might have. The man who sat in that bank did not. He was still wet, still tired, still carrying humiliation in his shoulders, but he had stopped shrinking. Richard returned with coffee in a white ceramic cup, not the paper kind from the lobby. Another small signal that the room had changed around me. I did not drink it. My stomach was too full of my mother's handwriting. Patricia opened the inventory then. West Texas acreage, mineral royalties, a minority stake in a private energy services company, conservative investment accounts, a safe deposit box, cash reserves large enough to make Richard lower his voice when he mentioned them. I listened without interrupting, because every number felt less like winning and more like grief learning mathematics. My mother had lived below her means, so I would never be loved above mine. That thought nearly broke me. Patricia gave me one instruction before sunrise. Do nothing emotional. No calls to Melissa. No messages to Blake. No announcements. We verify, transfer, protect, and then respond. It sounded like HVAC work in a strange way. Diagnose first. Touch nothing hot. Follow the lines. Shut off what can hurt you before opening the panel. I nodded, and for the first time that night, my trade did not feel small. It felt like training. At 3:16, Richard escorted me to the safe deposit vault. Patricia stood beside me while the clerk slid out a long metal box with Carter Family Trust engraved on the tag. Inside was another envelope, a key to my mother's house, photographs of land I had never seen, and a final note folded around a small brass key. Daniel, it read, money only matters when it protects your dignity or builds someone else's. Do not use it to become loud. Use it to become free. I sat down on the vault bench and covered my mouth, not to hide tears, but to hold in all the things I wished I had said when she was alive. By dawn, the rain had stopped. I walked out of First Lone Star Bank with the old card in my wallet, a motel room paid for by the bank, and no desire to knock on Melissa's door. She had thrown out a broke man. She had not known my mother had left the key under the whole world for me to find when I finally stopped begging at locked doors. The first morning after the bank did not feel like a victory. It felt like waking up inside someone else's life with my mother's handwriting still pressed against my chest. I checked into the motel Richard arranged, showered under water that never got hotter than lukewarm. My phone showed 11 missed calls from Melissa by 8:30. Then came a text. "Where are you? Do not make this dramatic. We need to talk like adults." I had left with 2 garbage bags and a dead account. But in her mind, I was still the man who owed an explanation. Patricia's instruction sat in my head like a steel bracket. Do nothing emotional. So I answered once. I'm safe. Future communication should be in writing. Her reply came fast. Do not talk to me like a lawyer. I set the phone face down and opened the folder Patricia had given me. The work started there, on a motel desk sticky with old coffee rings. Verify identification. Establish separate banking. Secure trust access. Inventory personal property. Preserve postnuptial agreement. By 10, Patricia had already scheduled meetings with trust administrators. By noon, Richard had arranged a temporary private account in my name only. By 2, I was standing inside my mother's little house on Marigold Lane, breathing dust lavender soap. I walked room to room with the brass key in my palm, seeing her everywhere. The quilt folded on the sofa, the jar of loose buttons, the grocery list still magnet to the refrigerator. She had hidden millions behind a life of careful pennies, but she had never hidden love. That was the lesson I had missed. Wealth without character is just noise with nicer furniture. Melissa had wanted noise. Blake had sold her the Echo. I wanted quiet strong enough to build from. That afternoon, I called my dispatcher and took myself off emergency rotation for the week. Not quitting, not disappearing, just breathing. Then I changed the locks on Marigold Lane myself, because paying someone else felt wrong in my mother's house. The screwdriver fit my hand better than the bank pen had. Metal clicked. Old deadbolt out. New deadbolt in. Simple work. Honest work. The kind that gives a man back to himself one turn at a time. Around sunset, Patricia called with confirmed numbers. She used phrases like 8 figures, diversified holdings, monthly distributions, and controlling options. I listened while sitting on the porch steps where Mom used to snap green beans into a bowl. The words should have lifted me. Instead, they made me look at my hands. Same cracked knuckles. Same scar near the thumb from a compressor panel. Same man Melissa had sent into the rain. I slept in my mother's guest room under a faded quilt and dreamed of nothing. No courtroom, no epaligi, no blaque. In the morning, I bought lumber, cleaning supplies, and a new coffee maker from a hardware store where nobody knew my balance. The clerk called me, sir, the same way he would have yesterday. I liked that. Over the next 3 days, I cleaned the house, repaired the porch, replaced a broken ceiling fan, and met with Patricia in the evenings. She filed protective notices, prepared a formal separation response, and contacted Melissa's attorney before Melissa even hired one. That was not revenge. That was weatherproofing. On the 4th day, Richard asked what I wanted done with the charitable clause Evelyn had left optional. I knew before he finished. Trade school scholarships. HVAC, electrical, plumbing, welding. Men and women who worked with their hands and got looked through by people who love polished shoes more than steady character. We named it the Carter Trade Initiative. When Patricia asked why, I told her my mother believed dignity should be practical. By Friday, Melissa stopped texting insults and started texting questions. Did you get a lawyer? Why is a bank calling about accounts? What is going on? I did not answer. I was sanding my mother's porch rail, sunlight warm on my shoulders, card safe in my wallet, learning that silence can be emptiness or it can be foundation. By the 2nd week, Dallas started telling Melissa the truth before I did. That is the thing about money in certain circles. It moves quietly, but people hear it anyway. A title company clerk mentioned my name near a commercial property on Henderson Avenue. A banker called her by mistake looking for my updated mailing address. Blake heard something from a broker at lunch, and the polished future he had promised her began to lose its shine before dessert arrived. I knew this because Patricia told me, not with gossip but with records. Melissa had called her office 3 times asking whether I had disclosed hidden assets during the marriage. Patricia answered the same way each time. All communication must go through counsel. Melissa hated locked doors unless she was the one closing them. I stayed at Marigold Lane and worked. Real work. The kind that does not care who is impressed. I finished the porch rail, repaired the kitchen sink, replaced the cracked tile by the back door, and cleared the garage where my mother had kept coffee cans full of screws sorted by size. Every room became a conversation with her. Every repair felt like saying, "I heard you, Mom." Richard sent formal statements. Patricia sent documents. The trust administrators spoke in careful sentences. I listened, signed where I needed to sign, and asked questions until the numbers became tools instead of thunder. The Carter Trade Initiative took shape on a folding table in my mother's dining room. 3 scholarships the first year, then 10 if the return stayed steady. Tuition, tools, boots, certification fees, child care stipends for working parents. Practical help. My mother would have liked that. She never believed in rescuing pride by handing people velvet. She believed in giving them a ladder, a wrench, and enough light to see the next step. Then Melissa came to Marigold Lane. It was Thursday evening, golden light through the pecan tree. Cicadas loud enough to cover the sound of her car at first. She pulled up in the white Lexus I had helped pay for, wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream blouse that looked too delicate for the dust in my driveway. I was on the porch with a paintbrush in my hand. For a second, neither of us spoke. She looked at the house, the fresh paint, the new rail, the brass numbers beside the door, then at me. "You changed the locks," she said. It was not a question. I said, "This is my mother's house." Her mouth tightened. She removed the sunglasses slowly, the way someone does when they want an entrance. "Daniel, what is going on?" I wiped paint from my thumb with a rag and set the brush across the can. She looked different from the woman who had stood in our doorway, with Blake waiting at the curb. Less certain. Still beautiful, still sharp, but the confidence had hairline cracks now. I told her Patricia had asked that we keep communication formal. She laughed once, brittle and small. "So now you have a lawyer and a banker. Congratulations." I did not answer. Silence was becoming easier. She stepped onto the first porch stair. "Blake says you're buying property." "Blake says a lot of things," I said. Her eyes moved over my face, searching for the old hunger, the old need to explain myself. I gave her neither. Then she said the sentence I had expected and still hated hearing. "We are still married." I looked past her at the Lexus, at the street, at the small house my mother had guarded with secrets and thrift. "Yes," I said. "Legally, not spiritually." That landed. She folded her arms, more to hold herself together than to challenge me. "I made mistakes," she said. "Blake is not who I thought he was." There it was, the empty promise finally echoing back to her. I felt no triumph, only a tired kind of clarity. Melissa had not returned because she remembered my heart. She had returned because the man she chose had started counting what I had. I picked up the paintbrush again. "Then you should talk to your attorney," I said. She stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. For years, she wanted a better life. Now I was building one, and for the first time, she was not invited inside. Melissa did not leave Marigold Lane angry. She left quiet, the kind of quiet people where when the room has answered a question they were afraid to ask. I watched her Lexus roll past the pecan tree and disappear toward the main road, then went back to painting the porch rail because unfinished work still deserved respect. That evening, Patricia called to say Melissa had finally retained counsel, a young attorney from an office that advertised aggressive family protection on billboards near the tollway. I almost felt sorry for him, not because Patricia would be cruel, but because facts are difficult opponents when they arrive signed, dated, and notarized. The next morning, my attorney forwarded the first demand. Melissa wanted temporary support, access to marital accounts, and an explanation of any undisclosed financial interest connected to Evelyn Carter. There was that name again, written by strangers, pulled from my mother's quiet life in a legal paper. I stared at it from the kitchen table on Marigold Lane while sunlight landed on the same floor where Mom used to kneel and scrub stubborn stains with baking soda. Melissa had spent years acting embarrassed by my mother's simplicity. Now she wanted a map to whatever simplicity had hidden. Patricia's reply was short, clean, and sharp. Separate property protected by agreement initiated by your client. No marital access. No emergency relief warranted. No drama, just law. By noon, Melissa called me 8 times. I let every call go unanswered. At 2, Blake called from a number I did not recognize. I knew his voice before he said his name. Smooth, expensive, suddenly less certain. Daniel, he said, man to man, I think we should clear the air. Man to man. The phrase almost made me smile. He had sat in a Range Rover while my wife pushed me into rain, and now he wanted fresh air. I told him all communication should go through attorneys. His tone changed then, not angry, just worried. Look, I did not know there was family money involved. That sentence told me everything Melissa had told him, everything he had valued, and everything he was afraid of losing. I ended the call without saying goodbye. Silence has a weight when the other person expects begging. That weekend, Richard invited me to First Lone Star Bank to finalize private wealth documents. I wore clean jeans, a pressed blue shirt, and the same work boots Melissa hated, polished only enough to remove dried paint. The lobby looked different in daylight. Marble floors, brass fixtures, fresh flowers, low voices, people who smelled like leather seats and decisions. Richard greeted me near the elevators. Before we could step inside, I saw Melissa across the lobby. She had come dressed for victory, cream suit, gold earrings, sunglasses pushed in her hair, but the lobby did not bend toward her. That was new. Behind her stood Blake, checking his phone, jaw tight. He looked less like a rescuer now and more like a man reading terms he had skipped. Melissa saw Richard place a hand respectfully near my shoulder, and her expression changed. It was not love. It was arithmetic. She understood that the doors opening for me were doors she had never been invited through. Richard asked if I wanted security. I said no. Melissa walked over anyway, voice low, carefully soft. Daniel, please, I think we both made decisions too fast. Blake looked up at that, and for the first time, I saw the bargain sour between them. She was already stepping away from him because the price tag on me had changed. I felt no pride, only an old sadness finally standing upright. Patricia arrived beside me with a folder under her arm and a courtroom calm in her eyes. Melissa looked at the folder, then at me. I said, "We're not discussing marriage in a lobby." Her lips parted, but nothing useful came out. Richard opened the elevator. I stepped in. Patricia followed. The doors began closing while Melissa stood outside beside Blake. Both of them reflected in polished brass, smaller than they had looked in the rain. For once, someone else was outside the door. Not me ever again. The elevator carried me upward so smoothly it felt like the building itself had decided not to disturb me. Richard stood beside the panel, Patricia beside the doors, and my reflection stared back from the polished metal, looking almost respectable. Same face, same tired eyes, same work boots, but something had shifted under my ribs. I was no longer trying to prove I belonged anywhere. The conference room on the 8th floor overlooked wet Dallas streets and morning traffic threading between glass towers. On the table waited documents, trust summaries, property maps, and my mother's old card resting inside a clear sleeve. Patricia opened the folder and placed the postnuptial agreement beside it, the one Melissa had insisted would protect her future from mine. When she arrived with her attorney 30 minutes later, she saw that paper before she saw me. Her face tightened. Blake was not with her now. That told me plenty. Men who love lifestyle often leave when the math turns complicated. Melissa sat across from me, wearing the cream suit from the lobby, but the victory had drained from it. Her attorney started talking first, careful, formal, full of phrases about fairness and marital expectation. Patricia let him finish, then slid the agreement forward with Evelyn's trust certification. The room grew quiet. Melissa stared at her own signature as if someone else had written it. Separate inheritance, separate trust assets, separate family holdings. Every word she had demanded now stood between her and the money she had smelled too late. I did not smile. I did not need to. The truth had no interest in applause. Melissa looked at me then, really looked not at the boots or the old shirt or the man she thought she could outgrow, but at the locked door behind me. "Daniel," she said, voice breaking softer than I expected, "I made a terrible mistake." I believed her. That was the hardest part, not because she loved me, but because she had finally understood the cost. Regret is not love. Sometimes it only means the receipt arrived. She talked about pressure, confusion, fear, Blake filling her head with promises, how she had been lonely, how she had forgotten who I was. I listened because a man can be finished and still be kind. When she reached for my hand, I moved it back gently. Not cruelly, just enough. I told her I would not fight to punish her, but I would not reopen a life that required me to become smaller so she could feel superior. The divorce would be handled cleanly. The house would be addressed according to Texas law. The trust would remain separate. The initiative in my mother's name would launch by fall. Melissa blinked at that. "Initiative," she repeated. I said trade scholarships. Heating and air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, welding. People who work hard and deserve a door that opens before their worst night. For the first time that day, my voice warmed. Patricia closed the folder. Richard returned the old card to me in a small black case, but I took it out and slipped it back into my wallet. It did not belong under glass yet. Not while it was still teaching me. Melissa watched that gesture, and something in her face fell apart quietly. Maybe she remembered laughing at my mother's Buick. Maybe she remembered calling Marigold Lane depressing. Maybe she understood that the woman she had underestimated had protected me better than anyone in that room. The meeting ended without shouting. Papers were gathered. Chairs moved back. Signatures waited for another day. As I stepped into the lobby, Melissa called my name once. I turned because dignity does not require pretending people never mattered. She asked if I hated her. I looked at the marble floor, the brass doors, the daylight beyond the glass, and thought about rain, garbage bags, a declined card, and my mother's handwriting. "No," I said. "I am done being measured by people who cannot see value until a bank confirms it." Outside, Dallas had turned bright after the storm. I walked to my Silverado, work boots echoing on clean stone, and drove toward Marigold Lane, free at last.